Welcome to Stroller Coaster, the podcast that takes you on the wild ride of parenting that we're all on together, created by Munchkin, the most loved baby lifestyle brand in the world. Well, Munchkin makes innovative products for babies and children so parents can enjoy just all of those little moments. I'm Lynn Smith, and with me, as always, my co-host, Justin. Hi, Justin.
Hello, Lynn. How are you?
I am fantastic. I'm excited for this episode. Let's get right to it. We're talking today about crying, and I'm really excited about this episode because this is something obviously we experience not just every so often. It's every day, right? Like it is all different scenarios. There's a meltdown, or maybe it's just an emotional roller coaster for the kids where they just have something that they're melting down about. And our instinct is to be like, please just stop crying. We want to make it better. But I think a lot of what you're going to learn if you're listening right now in this episode is maybe what we've been doing is the exact opposite. We're not making it better. And that's what I'm really excited to learn more about.
Yeah, me too. I mean, crying's tricky because it's a sound, but it has,
like a siren?
50 different meanings. It's like a siren.
It's like
it could be anything.
Siren. Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't, even though the sound's the same, the meaning behind it can be completely different depending on the situation. So it's almost like a language you have to speak, I feel like sometimes, with kids.
Yeah, like we have this thing where like they fall and they start crying and then you want to comfort them. But then if you say, no, you can't have ice cream because it's 6 a.m. and then there's a hysterical scream, that's something that we're really going to tackle. Like, what do we do in those moments? And we've really all been there. We want to put this spin on it that's kind of negative, like stop it, stop it, stop it. But our expert today, I think, is going to give us a different perspective. Really incredible insights with Rachel Tuchman. She is a straightforward, no-nonsense mental health counselor who writes on this subject. She's also helped a lot of overwhelmed parents dealing with the same thing in her practice. And then you'll hear a story from journalist Irina Gonzalez about how she and her husband deal with their son's crying that's completely different than what they grew up with. And it is working. A lot to get to. Let's start the show. I'm here with Rachel Tuchman. She's a mental health expert who's seen firsthand how changes can get some real results. I know I, as a parent, have a visceral reaction to the sounds of my kids crying, a physical reaction. And our instinct as parents many times is, stop crying, stop crying. I'm curious, what should we be saying to them when this is happening?
So I just want to validate how, yes, like even, often people think, well, because I'm a therapist, I must always be so calm and cool and collected when my kids are crying. And I've been guilty many, many times of stop crying. Okay, it's time to stop. Enough. Because yes, it is something that can be very stressful for us. Think about it yourself. When someone tells you calm down, it usually just makes us more angry. It feels very condescending. So it just doesn't help. The first thing I would say is just use words to describe what we see. You're really upset. You're not happy with what I said. You're mad at your brother. Then we can start saying, okay, so then what do we do instead? I don't say stop crying anymore. I'm not mean or yelling or, trying to scare you into stopping from crying. Now I'm going to start being helpful, and I'm going to actually start modeling for you how to regulate your emotions. If we're screaming at our kids when they're hysterical, we're showing them to be hysterical, right? And if we want them to calm down, then showing them that they should calm down by screaming at them, it's not teaching them what we want them to learn.
I want to dig deeper into what some of those tools are, what we should be saying, what we should be doing. But I want to know a little bit more about why that stop crying is harmful. You use the word harmful.
You're telling kids to repress their emotions because when you say stop crying, you don't actually take away the sadness. You've just taught them to shut up and shut down. And when you do that, those emotions stay in the body. And we know from plenty of research, and even again, think about your own personal experience. When you shove something down, it's still there. And it could manifest in physical symptoms, headaches, stomach aches, all kinds of health issues, or in kids, we see this more behavioral issues. So, I often will see kids in my office that teachers think or parents think have attention issues or behavioral issues. And they don't realize that really what's going on is this child has anxiety or they're unhappy at home or there's something more emotional going on. But if we maybe start getting curious and really talking about, well, how do we respond to them when they're upset and how do they behave when they're upset? we might understand that, yes, there's something there that's not being attended to, you know?
And there may be some people that are listening thinking, but when I was a kid, my parents would say, hey, you better stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. And look at how I turned out. And that it almost like it's this grit. It's this difference in parenting philosophies. Can you tell me a bit about what might be off in that statement?
What is the bar of I'm fine? Like, I'm not in prison. I'm not, abusing substances. Maybe some of your anxiety or maybe some of your self-esteem issues or maybe some of your relationship issues are related to that issue of not being validated, of being told, stop crying. I'm going to give you something to cry about. You're always crying. You're so dramatic. Maybe some of the stuff that you struggle with is related to that.
So instead, what should we be saying?
We're going to have to trust our parenting intuition here, and you're going to have to really know your kid, because sometimes it helps to say something, right? To use words and to describe what they're feeling so that they can connect what I'm feeling with the words that you're saying, because kids sometimes can't make sense of their feelings. Then it's kind of like, oh, yes, I am mad, or I am upset, or I am jealous. And other times when we do that, it makes them more angry. And some of you might have kids like that stop talking to me. No, I'm not mad either. Right? It might make them more upset. Say, okay, it's not working. And then maybe later on when the dust has settled and we're in a good space and I'm tucking them in and they're cozy and they're all cute at the end of the day. And I say, do you want to talk about what happened before when you got really mad at your sister or at me? Or I just want to tell you, I love you so much. And it was so upsetting to see you so upset. You were really, really sad. You were really, really angry. What happened? And again, maybe they can't make sense of it, but because you have the advantage of being the adult and having more knowledge and maybe being a little bit of an objective observer, you can help describe what happened. And I think that's really, what we want for them. We want them to learn to speak instead of scream and cry and tantrum. And again, crying is okay, but we want words to come with it.
That's the hard part I have, is sort of treading the line between speaking to the emotions of crying and then the communication breakdown of crying. Because I find myself saying, calm down, I can't even understand what you're saying, or something like that.
There's this concept of like the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain, right? And the upstairs brain is where all that rational thought is, and being someone who's kind of calm and is able to access language. And then there's that downstairs brain, which is really all emotion. When they're in their downstairs brain, which is what's happening when they're tantruming or screaming, or they're just, and think about it. Sometimes you think you look like a wild animal, like what on earth, right? They're like roaring and screaming. It is very primal. So we want to be able to get to that upstairs brain, but we have to first create a connection. So what I find is helpful is to either, again, and you have to know your kid, maybe they don't want to be touched, but either hold their hands, squeezing their hands, that helps. Say, I'm going to start taking a deep breath. When you're ready, copy my breathing, right? So then you start breathing nice and calm, and then they can copy your breathing. Or if they're screaming, you say, in a calm voice, I really want to help you. Can you match my voice? I'm listening and I'm here to help. Let's talk like this together. You're not saying, I'm not going to talk to you unless you talk like me. Again, that's going to make them more angry. To get the body calm so that then they can access that frontal part of their brain where then they are willing to listen to, hey, let's talk about what just happened before.
I've been guilty, and I'll admit, I've been on both sides of the spectrum. I have been in that frustrated point where you're just dealing with it all day and they've been whining and crying. You're like, just stop crying. And then the other side of the spectrum, I've had those moments where I realized that they just need to get this out. And I've sat and I've asked questions as they're going through it, like, oh, that must be so hard. Was it hard? And then they'll talk more and more. And I see the difference. And it's so unbelievable how much it works. And Rachel, what are some of the long-term ramifications here?
So there was actually a 2015 study that looked at college men and found that kids who were growing up in environments where their emotions were denied or hidden, or they were just never taught in a healthy way how to regulate their emotions, they had more depression, self-regulation issues, impulsivity. And so I think that really kind of then reinforces what I was saying about how when our kids are having a hard time, It's so important for us to pay attention and name it, because then that helps them to be able to identify those feelings when they're older and not turn to unhealthy coping skills. Like I said, substance abuse disorders or eating disorders or angry outbursts. It's really important. We also know that parents who respond to their kids in a more comforting manner have kids who are just more socially well-adjusted. They're more outgoing. They're friendlier, meaning that they're not always crying. They had better social skills than parents who were unresponsive or standoffish or shutting down their emotions. It's a short-term, and I'm going to say inconvenience in quotations here, to have to sit with them and talk with them. But this is how they learn. They're not born understanding what this feeling is inside my body, that I'm getting so worked up. I need you to explain it to me, mom or dad. I need you to identify what I'm feeling. If you've ever been in a therapy office, by the way, and a therapist, like, you say that you say something that's going on, and then your therapist says, oh, X, Y, and Z, they describe it, and you're like, oh my God, yes, right? That clarity you get when they're like, oh my God, yes, that is exactly what I was thinking or feeling. It's the same thing for our kids. Thank you. I feel understood. She gets it. It's such a validating, wonderful feeling. And again, your kids will take that and they will use that moving forward in their lives. Really
I love
important.
that, because it sometimes feels like to us as parents who are stressed, that our kids want to be crying for some reason. And I love what you're saying, because it's like, no, they don't. My crying was an alarm that I was feeling bad.
Yeah.
And you came and helped put out the fire.
I think there are some parents that may think, if I let them cry, how are they going to go out in the real world and handle some of the challenges that they face? Like, this is part of resiliency.
Resilience is actually built through experiencing a tough emotion and then having a support while you're in that tough emotion. It means that we say, I see what's going on. I'm here with you. And even if I can't make it better, you're not going to be alone.
And don't you have a story also of your own daughter who's over at a friend's house? Can you tell us about that?
But my daughter was actually at a friend, and she was saying that one of the kids in the family that she was at was, I think he was playing basketball or something, and he kept missing the shot, and he was crying and getting upset. And the dad came out and was like, stop crying, man up. Those words, man up, which is like the bane of my existence. Man up, stop crying. You could just try again. It's not a big deal, blah, blah, blah. And he was crying more and more and getting more upset. And the dad went inside, and my daughter went over to him. She said, and you're really upset that you missed the shot, right? And he was like, yeah, I really wanted to. And like, just blurting it all out, telling her, I feel so embarrassed, and my brother was getting the shot and I wasn't getting the shot. And she's like, oh, and it feels so bad to feel like he's better at it. And you want to be good at basketball too. And he was like, yeah. And wiping his tears away, she saw he was getting calmer. And she was like, it was amazing. When she finished talking with him, he got up and like continued playing. And she was like, why didn't the dad see that the more he was yelling at this kid, the more upset he was getting, no, stop crying, stop, man up. And he was louder and louder. And she was actually getting stressed from the crying, like, oh my God, I can't. But I think part of it also was that she saw, like, she was an objective observer here of like, don't you see what's going on? You're not helping him. And so I was just proud that the empath in her wanted to help him feel better, but also that she used the skill that she sees we use in our house to validate him, to give words to what he was feeling. And then that gave him the confidence to get up and go try again. He was like, yes, that's exactly what I'm feeling. And he was like, I'm going to go try again. Someone, saw me and saw how I felt, and now I feel better.
And so, Rachel, if my kids are crying, I can't get a hold of you, your daughter should be my next.
Yeah. Please have her be on speed dial for all of us.
Right.
Yeah. Rachel, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Rachel. As a parent, when you see your child just take on sort of the things you've tried to teach them, it's just proving it, but also spreading it to someone else. So it's just satisfying as a parent.
And you've got the facts to prove it, right?
I do. Well, the fact I want to talk about today is that crying is good for us in ways that we maybe don't even know. So crying reduces our stress level biologically by removing cortisol, which is a stress hormone that we release through our tears. So every tear someone cries is actually helping bring their stress levels down. While at the same time, our bodies are producing mood-boosting hormones. So it's great. I feel like crying right now.
We always feel like great after a good cry as adults.
Exactly.
So you can imagine what it does for kids. was just saying to my husband the other day, like, wow, remember diaper days?
Huh.
Like the vivid memory was real.
I'll wake up in a cold sweat with a full diaper flashback every now and again.
Exactly. And if you are actually still in the thick of it with diapers, you're going to want to check out the Step Diaper Pail from Munchkin. It has a self-sealing system that locks in odors, and your nursery will stay fresh with lavender-scented baking soda powered by Arm & Hammer. You can open it with your foot when your hands are full. And listen to this. It was named the best diaper pail by Good Housekeeping and the New York Times.
Wow.
So click on the link in the show description and see for yourself and get a discount with code podcast. So we've been talking about what happens when we say to our child, stop crying. Well, listen to what Irina Gonzalez says when someone said to her, baby, men don't cry. Here's our correspondent, Fleece, with your parenting story of the day.
It was a hot summer day in July, and Irina's little boy had just turned 3 months old.
My parents invited my family to this really nice little backyard barbecue. My parents have a really nice pool, so we were all very excited to get in the water as we're passing the baby around. And my son gets splashed a little bit, and he really doesn't like it because he's a baby and something is getting in his vision. He starts to cry. My dad looks at the baby and says, "Los hombres no lloran." This translates to "men don't cry." And I am immediately very shocked by that statement. I grew up in a Latino household, and many of us grew up with machista culture, which is very much the tough guy personality. I never really felt comfortable with that. So I turned to my dad, looked him straight in the eyes, and I said, "We don't say that. We don't say that in front of my son because, one, he's 3 months old. He is going to cry. That's the only way babies can communicate. Secondly, I don't think it leads to anything good other than men suppressing their emotions, which I don't want for my child, ever."
Irina knew from day one that she would never say to her son, "Stop crying."
Before I was dating my husband, I had a boyfriend who expressed to me that he was really upset because he grew up in a men don't cry household. And now as an adult, he felt that he couldn't express his feelings. He physically wasn't able to cry even during moments that he wanted to. One of the most painful moments that he told me about was when he couldn't cry after finding out about his father's terminal cancer diagnosis. When my husband and I got together, we talked about how we want to raise a family. We really talked about how boys are socialized and what kind of things we want to impart to our son that we didn't experience in the best way when we ourselves were children.
Once he was born, the journey began.
I started to buy my son some books about emotions, and we started to read those books nightly. I wanted to not only let him know that it's okay to express his feelings, but I wanted to help him connect the crying with the feeling of sadness. If he fell and started to cry, I would hug him and comfort him. And I would say, "I know that you're crying because you fell and it hurts. It makes you very sad." Then in other moments, he would cry because mommy or daddy said no. And what I would say, "I know that you're very sad because mommy and daddy had to say no. And here are the reasons why we said no. It's okay to cry because you're sad, but we're still going to say no." I wanted my son to understand that there are different kinds of crying and different kinds of emotions that bring us to cry.
Irina was doing well, taking her son through crying moments. But then there was whining.
One day I was at the grocery store with my son, and we're going through this aisle, and I'm telling him no, he can't have all of the things he wants. And he starts really whining. I found myself saying, "Stop whining." And all of a sudden, I remember that time in the pool when I told my dad that he shouldn't say, "Stop crying." Crying and whining is really normal child behavior. So I turned to him and I said, "I'm sorry. What I mean to say is, right now you're upset because mommy had to say no to that other cereal you wanted. I can give you a big hug, but we are going to move on now.
So, does that approach always work?
Sometimes phrasing things this way helps to calm him down right away. Other times, it does create a bigger freak out because he's still a little kid and he's still working on all of this. But that is actually the whole point. I'm not saying this to get him to stop whining. I'm saying it because I want him to understand that he's experiencing different emotions, that I'm here to help him navigate and ultimately to regulate himself.
Irina said kids hear coded messages all the time that put crying in a negative light.
Sometimes it's congratulating a child for not crying when perhaps they have a really good reason to cry. Are you going to cry now? Or we don't cry here? Or please don't start crying. That's quote unquote weak. They got to be quote unquote tough. What happens is that their difficult feelings get bottled up until we're exploding or drinking or smoking away those feelings. It's not weakness. It's really just emotional intelligence.
Then when Irina's son was 3.5 years old, he said something she didn't expect so soon.
One day he was upset. Something had happened. And at the end of it, he said, I was sad and mad, and now I'm happy. Not only was he able to recognize a feeling, but that he was able to recognize that he had one feeling and that eventually it led to this other feeling. He was able to talk about his feelings without any shame. It made me feel so good because we had been really working on teaching him this kind of emotional intelligence since day one, since that moment in the pool with my dad. It's not always easy to even keep myself in line and keep doing this, but it's really worth it. And I'm really excited to see how else he develops.
Yeah, there's sort of a shame that's put on this. And we have to point out, it's a baby. Can you imagine that somebody would have, it boggles my mind. But I really like that shame piece of how when we are putting that on a child, what it does to them.
Well, and I think there's crying. A baby is not trying to cry to be annoying or to like be dramatic or for any other reason. There's something happening. There's a communication happening. And if you just say, stop that, those emotions get repressed or crushed down, or it just creates this bad situation.
I feel like we might have a lot more well-adjusted adults if they had a different perspective when they were younger of what it meant to cry. Crying is important. It's something that will help them to regulate themselves. And then also something that I've come to really understand is that there's a need and a purpose for the cry. That this is something we like to call it in our house, like you're unloading your backpack, right? Like you've got all this stuff that's heavy weighing on you. And if you can unload that backpack, you just feel lighter and more at ease. And that's the whole goal.
A backpack full of tears. That's my country album I'm releasing.
Such a great and informative show today. And if you have a topic that you want us to dig into here on Stroller Coaster, just email us at podcast@munchkin.com. And I want to thank Rachel Tuchman, also Irina Gonzalez for their stories and what they shared with us. As always, thank you to Munchkin for making this podcast possible. You can find all of your favorite Munchkin products at munchkin.com.
And I want to say, if you're looking for something fun to do with your kids, to check out our podcast, Stroller Coaster Storytime. It's got great stories, improv actors, funny sounds. It's very fun for the whole family.
Yeah, the whole family can actually listen to a podcast together. Where else can you do that?
Put it on in the car. Let's go. It's right here in the same feed. Look for Stroller Coaster Storytime. Check it out.
One thing you may not know is that Munchkin's Wild Love product line was created to educate kids on at-risk animal species and support the International Fund for Animal Welfare. When you support Munchkin, you support our wildlife. Okay, it's time for some self-care. It's your moment of calm, your much-needed break from the stress of parenting. So let's head to the tropical seas of the Great Barrier Reef, a haven of sea turtles, dolphins, and some 400 species of coral. So breathe in the fresh sea air and feel yourself unwind. Enjoy.